vous entends.
Patientez 2 minutes pour qu'on puisse trouver un interprète pour les gens qui sont dans la salle. Ils sont tous anglophones. D'accord?
Ah, ok. Bon, je peux continuer en anglais sans souci. Hein.
Ok, en anglais alors,
Je peux
s'il vous plaît.
continuer en anglais.
En anglais, s'il vous plaît, oui.
Ok.
Si
Sorry if
vous pouvez faire une synthèse de ce que vous avez commencé à dire. Alors, vu qu'ils ont raté beaucoup de choses, si vous pouvez faire une petite synthèse avant de poursuivre en anglais, s'il vous plaît. Une synthèse de ce que vous avez commencé à dire avant de poursuivre en anglais, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Okay. So the presentation of my paper will be articulated into 4 steps. The first will be the motivation of the paper. The second will be the presentation of the methodological framework. Then we will present the result and the policy implication and future research. So as for the motivation of the paper, we can notice that since several years, state capacity is a cornerstone in the reflection of economists. Since state capacity is understood as the institutional ability of the state to design and implement a broad range of policies delivering services and benefits to household and firm, state capacity appear to influence economic growth, social development, health outcomes, social cohesion, and allow states to respond more effectively to exogenous shocks. For example, if we can see an event like the COVID-19 over the year 2019 and 2020, several states failed to respond to this kind of shock because they were not capable. So, following the interest on state capacity, some economists have tried to find the main determinants of the lower state capacity in some country or not. So the main determinants that have been identified are most historical factors or geographical and political economic factors. Concerning historical factors, the main determinants that have been identified are the colonial institutions. For authors like Asimoglu, state capacity left to the heritage from colonial institutions. And for authors like Besley and Persson, it is the conflicts that determines the level of state capacity. Concerning geographical and political economy factors, the main reason of state capacity are inequalities and resource dependency, especially natural resource dependency as well as terrorism. So when you see the map of the sanction around the world, we can see that the countries that have the lower state capacity also exceed the higher level of sanction. They are more sanctioned by other countries. For example, in the previous map of the state capacity, we have seen that the most lower state capacity can be seen in sub-Saharan Africa. And as we can see on this map, the sub-Saharan Africa is also the region that is also more sanctioned by the other countries. It's also the case for the South Asia, where we can see that countries like China or Pakistan are more sanctions, while countries like the Northern American one and the European one are not sanctions. So, our paper aims to examine the impact of international sanctions on state capacity. And why do we think that international sanctions could affect state capacity? First, international sanctions are generally considered as punitive measures imposed by a country, group, by a country or a group of countries.
The project, we can see the projection on the screen here.
With the international
Try to focus
obligation.
the projection in the center of the screen.
Can you please mute yourself?
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry?
No, we can see the...
Okay, you have 5 minutes, please.
Okay. The second motivation of our paper is that sanction as a tool of diplomacy have the potential to influence multiple dimensions of state capacity. For example, trade, the quality of institution, or the political stability. So the contribution of our paper is at least twofold. First of all is a pioneering study which explored the effect of international sanctions on state capacity and the main transmission mechanism through which international sanctions influence state capacity. Second, it underscored the critical need for decision makers to assess how sanctions can exacerbate existing vulnerabilities and generate unforeseen long-term consequences. So we are going to go forward the methodological framework. We have used an economic approach in which we have tried to measure the state capacity using the approach of O'Reilly and Murphy to measure state capacity that combine really data on administrative, bureaucratic capacity, military capacity, and infrastructural capacity. And we have used the data on international sanctions produced by the Global Sanctions Database. So our econometric model is present as follows. So the main result of our study. So as the main result of our study, we have found that international sanctions really reduce state capacities. And when questioning how international sanctions reduce state capacity, we have found that international sanctions narrow state capacity through the reduction of economic development measured by GDP per capita, through the reduction of government effectiveness, and the increase of political instability, as well as the increase of inflation. Our result was robust to different econometric approach, and they confirmed that international sanctions really reduce state capacity. Moreover, when relying on the different types of sanctions, we have found that armed sanctions, military sanctions, trade sanctions, as well as financial sanctions and travel sanctions really contribute to reduce state capacity. And the great effects can be observed on trade sanctions. Okay, another result that was interesting was that when we deal with the multilateral sanctions, some sanctions from the G7 and the sanction of the United Security Council were effective. So armed sanctions, military sanctions, and trade sanctions were effective when considering G7 sanctions and United Nations Security Council's sanction. And when dealing with the effect of sanctions by region, for example, we have found that in the Americas region, as well as Asia and Europe's regions, the sanctions do not affect state capacity. But in Africa and Oceania, the sanctions reduce really state capacity. We have also found that advanced countries...
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sorry?
You have 4 minutes. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. 2 minutes. Okay. Just 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
So, in advanced countries, we have found that international sanctions, however, contributes to improve state capacity, while in developing countries, international sanctions narrows state capacities. Okay. What else can we say? Okay, so building on these results, we have demonstrated that international sanctions really reduce state capacity. However, our results call for a careful re-examination of the current practice, encouraging preference for more targeted measures and providing accompanying mechanisms to limit institutional erosion. But our result also raised a fundamental question for the international community. How can state capacity can be rebuilt once sanctions have been lifted? So thank you for your kind attention. And sorry if my English was not the best.
No, it was the best. And thank you so much for this presentation. It was very insightful. Let's move right away to the next presentation, which is about foreign assistance and democratic development in Ghana. I'm not sure if the presenter
I don't think
this
person is present. If they're not present,
let's move to
the next person. Yes.
Move to the next one. Yes, if I may say, it's without any doctor or Mr. whatever, Jean-Pierre. If I may.
Is Jean-Pierre here? Is Jean-Pierre in the room? No, he's not here. So go to the next one.
Okay. The paper about external actors' influences in politics and governance in Africa.
Are they here?
Mm-hmm.
Those papers. Are you here?
Excellent.
Okay, not here. All right, then you go to the next one. Noel Romaud, University of Yaoundé. Not here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Not here. Okay. So the last one.
I think the last one is also not here.
African University.
Yeah. So Heidi, you can present your paper.
So it's my.
Your turn. Yes.
Okay, I will present my paper.
Yes.
And then
sorry if I interrupt. Can I interrupt?
Please go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
I had to intervene in an in-person panel, but I wrote many times to the organizers that I cannot and I should be in online. Okay, if I can speak.
I think you can present now. I think you can present in this session because
thank you very much.
The panel is about global politics, so I think you can present. You
Perfect.
can have like 10 minutes. I hope this is fine.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I just 10 minutes is fine. And my presentation, the title of my presentation is From the Sovereign Representative Bond to Post-Political Governance. The main point of my speech is about this great transformation and transference of power that came from a political perspective to another one. The first one is the so-called sovereign political idea, sovereign political practice. And the second one, the point of arrival, is that of the so-called political governance. I mean, we will use especially two authors that one of them was a jurist and the second one was a philosopher and a sociologist, but both of them can be interpreted as politologists. The first one, of course, is Carl Schmitt, the famous German jurist from Blettenberg City. and the second one is Michel Foucault, the French philosopher. Both of them studied and deepened the concept of sovereignty and its application in the social sphere, especially in politics. But I mean, sovereignty is not only a political issue, but it's an anthropological one. And both of them came to the same conclusion, that was the fact that in some ways sovereignty vanished from the world, from the social world, especially in the Western world, for some reasons that came from ideology, from economics, and from society itself. Those three aspects influenced the anthropological sphere, changing the way of acting of the people, of the human being, respect to the political issue. So let's talk, first of all, let's talk about the sovereignty in the concept of Carl Schmitt. It is very important to note that for Carl Schmitt, sovereignty was something related to the public sphere. Indeed, as I told, he was a jurist, so he started his analysis on the political phenomenon on the juridic level, on the law level, on the juridic theoretical level. He started to deepen the concept of law, understanding that the fundamental ground of law is based on politics itself and on two aspects of politics. One of these is what he called the nomos. That is a ancient Greek term that means the relations of division and distribution applied into a determined society. Those we can call as the administrative part of politics. And the second point is that of the friend and foe division. He said that everything in the political sphere and then in the juridical sphere was born from the main issue, that is the possibility of enmity between people. And when he talked about people, he talked about human groups. He said that those human groups, the human groups can be both enemy and friends, and the relation of friendship come from the relation of enmity, because in his opinion, it is impossible to have more than one fracture between groups. I mean, in the political arena, in the political scenario, it is always necessary to find the enmity clivage, but it cannot be more than one. Okay.
C'est comment, chef? Mais lui, à la DAC, là-bas, à l'entrée du campus.
Please mute yourself.
L'entrée du campus.
Just to go to the conclusion of the Carl Schmitt understanding of politics,
yes,
he says that...
extra minutes.
Okay, thank you. That in the end of the... Sorry, okay. In the end of the Carl Schmitt reasoning, he said that those political structures founded themselves in this publicistic way of organizing society. That is indeed the law. I mean, in his opinion, law came from politics and organized society in this kind of relation between the institution and the people as a whole. I mean, the citizens in some ways. And this kind of relation was based on the concept of sovereignty, because back to the concept of conflict, that is friend and foe idea, and to the concept of nomos, he said that everything in the political sphere come from that point in the past where there is no law at all. He said in his famous book, there is The Dictatorship. There is, of course, a study on the concept of the dictatorship that in an ancient time where no law existed, politics created law just by the sovereign means. And the sovereign means are the capacity, and I quote Carl Schmitt, to choose a state of exception. So when the laws didn't apply and didn't exist at all. That's the point. I mean, for Carl Schmitt, politics start where no laws existed and create laws and then create society and political society. I have to go to the conclusion really because I have some issues with
yes, you have just 1 minute remaining, okay?
Okay. So the point is that both for Carl Schmitt and Michel Foucault, the issue is that with the coming of a new understanding of society based on the individual, something changed because the idea that someone can create law from the absolute nothingness, it's impossible to the so-called normativist point of view. Michel Foucault said that modern individualism that was born, of course, in Western Europe, created a way to understand politics that was just administrative and not political in the friend and foe way, that in the conflictual way that Carl Schmitt hypothesized. Very different from the idea and the concept of sovereignty and politics as government. There is a different from governmental way of acting. The point is that in this perspective, the human being, the institutions, and all the things that exist in the social sphere, and I go to the conclusions, are just elements of the administrative field, and so they are interpreted as objects and no more as subjects. That means things capable to create laws and to recreate and restart, or in some ways invent new political orders. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. We have actually enjoyed this presentation. However, you should have presented in panel number 10 about reimagining politics, people, and power, because this panel is about global politics. But however, we have enjoyed so much your insight about the development in the concept of sovereignty from Foucault and Schmitt. Please share with us how to pronounce the name correctly, because we were suffering here to pronounce the name of the author, of the political thinker correctly. Anyways.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yes. Hello?
Yes, I am Asana from Cameroon.
Mm-hmm.
I am not part of this panel, but I would like to do my presentation here, if it is possible.
I'm so sorry. You should have presented in which panel?
A minute, please. Diasporic discourse and practice in sovereignty.
I am so sorry, but this is another paper that's not related to this panel.
But it is only the link that they sent to me. When I connected, I don't reach my panel.
Okay. To reach a compromise, you can present, but just in a 10 minutes, please.
No, sorry.
Because we have a very tight schedule.
Yeah.
Let's be just 10 minutes.
Okay.
I am comfortable in French.
To accommodate the technical problems. So we can give him the floor just for 10 minutes, if you don't mind. to present
yes.
this paper?
Yes, I am comfortable in French. I can do it in French.
Sorry, Professor Kares, this person, Dr. Asana, is supposed to present in the next panel, which is from 4 o'clock till 6 p.m. Our time.
Okay.
So I think you should wait for that next panel, please, if you don't mind.
Okay, so I will move.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for clarification, actually. So let's move on to my paper that I am authoring it. So give me just a second to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, excellent. Good afternoon, everyone, once more. It's once more an honor to be part of the African Association Congress and this panel, and I would like to thank the conference organizing committee for their massive work in pulling this congress. Thank you so much, and I am really honored to have the opportunity to present our paper. Let me first introduce myself, because I didn't introduce myself in the beginning. I am Heidi Kares. I'm Assistant Professor of International Relations at Cairo University, Egypt. And I, with my dear colleague, Dr. Abir Abazaid, are going here to present a very early draft of our paper titled Deconstructing the EU Discourse Towards the Nile Basin Between Geopolitics and Sustainability. This study, this paper, focuses on the collective EU discourse and seeks to demonstrate how does the EU's discourse on the Nile Basin oscillate between geopolitical imperatives and sustainability paradigm. It reflects how the EU discourse and practices are characterized by a selective interpretation of water management principles, different framings of the water sector, bilateralism, and salience of geopolitical concerns. The methodology that we have used in this paper is the critical discourse analysis, mainly the historical approach developed by Ruth Vodek. From its name, it's critical, so it focuses on the unequal power relations constructed by the discourse, the hierarchy found in the discourse, and actually this approach raises different questions, and all of these questions are very valid in our case. Like, for example, how does the EU discursively construct the Nile Basin as a region? How are the Nile Basin, the EU, the Europeans refer to, how are subjects in the region categorized, tagged between we, them, the other, the enemy, the undeveloped? How are these subjects represented, labeled, protected, conflictual, peaceful, progressive, backward? How are these presentations intensified or mitigated? And how do these presentations fit into the EU practice? So first, we raised the question about how has the EU constructed the Nile Basin geopolitically? Of course, based on critical geopolitics, and instead of dealing with regions as predefined, regions are analyzed as constructed. So EU constructs the Nile Basin as part of different regions, mainly, of course, the Mediterranean or the southern neighborhood, the Horn of Africa and East Africa. And the EU engagement with these regions is shaped by different initiatives and different priorities. And for instance, Egypt here is part of the southern neighborhood and the European neighborhood policy. The Horn of Africa is designated as a geopolitical priority for the EU. There is a EU strategy towards the Horn of Africa. The EU also has economic engagement with the East African Community and so on. On the other hand, the EU addresses the Nile as a basin or sub-basins, which is evident in its transboundary water management cooperation projects, like, for example, the project that EU announced in March 22, the Team Europe flagship initiative on transboundary water management in Africa within the framework of the EU new global gateway strategy. And this initiative involves cooperation between both the EU collectively and the EU member states. Moving on to the second aspect, which is the process of othering. Deconstructing the EU discourse on the Nile. When we look at the EU discourse on the Nile, it's very clear that there's a process of othering, and there are different representations of the Nile Basin and its countries in the EU discourse. The EU discourse constructs the Nile Basin as inferior. EU discourse underlines the power asymmetries between the EU and the Nile Basin countries, often implicitly position the Nile Basin countries as underdeveloped, institutionally deficient, necessitating external European expertise for effective governance. That's why the EU water diplomacy, for example, usually emphasizes capacity building, technical assistance, and we can see in the discourse terms like helping them achieve, assist in developing, enhance the capacity. All of these terms, of course, manifest this presentation of the Nile Basin as inferior. The second aspect, which is EU universalism. And to summarize this, we can say that the European size, our size, fits all. And not only our size fits all, but our superior size fits all, sometimes denying local agency. And this is very clear in the EU water management initiatives that are based on the Water Framework Directive, which is the internal water management framework within the EU, and the EU Water Initiative, which is the program launched by the EU in 2002 to address global water challenges, to make the EU a global actor in water governance. Both those two initiatives are the blueprint for the EU external policy in the field of water, and they, of course, to some extent, impose the preferred normative standards derived from the EU internal governance framework, which is the Water Framework Directive, to think of these normative standards as globally applicable. However, some scholars argue that the EU has been ineffective in promoting the Water Framework Directive outside of Europe, for different reasons, of course, because there's lack of incentives and conditionality and so on. Moving on to framing the Nile as a security threat, and here there are different aspects. Of course, the first aspect that will come to our mind, which is the Grand Renaissance, Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and the conflict between Egypt, mainly between Egypt and Ethiopia, and its implications for regional security. But there's also another aspect, which is water scarcity, which is very salient in the European water diplomacy discourse, and also the climate conflict nexus that, climate leading to water scarcity, and this can lead to spillover effects on migration flows, terrorism, regional stability, and so on. Now I will hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Abir Abazaid, to discuss the second part. We are going to finish very quickly, inshallah.
Thank you so much. But building on what Dr. Heidi you can see from these two maps how the European Union can see the Nile River, the longest river in Africa. So it is just the delta. It is coming from the European perspective, or it is coming from the source of the Nile. And quickly, we have three patches as an examples how the discourse is provided. So this is the frameworks that Dr. Heidi just mentioned, how in order to build the normative assumption of a European Union towards the other water management in Africa. But let's do looking for, and you can just looking at the highlighted words, because this is the highlighted words reflecting what Dr. Heidi said about the discourse. So usually you can find it, even if it is a delta. This is one related to agreement with Egypt. It is sustainable management, but how we can do it according to no harm principle, which is international law, and also in the line with Egypt position regarding the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and the third one regarding the Green Deal. And the Green Deal, this is where is the interest and the security of European Union. The second one is, it is coming. Yes, as renewable resources, hydropower now it's becoming very critical for everyone. And for it is part of security of European Union. That's why in their innovation partnership for hydropower. But how they using the hydropower coming from the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, you can see how they are tackling the Nile as sub-region. It is the Horn Africa already faces too many other challenges, all strategic importance for us. And again, the technical imagination and the political boldness. Again, this is reflecting the three aspects Dr. Heidi mentioned about security, about the EU value, and the superiority of the European stuff. And the last one, we cannot deny that European Union as a multilateral institution and also promoting all of this idea, they doing it and they supporting other multilateralism. And I think one of papers used in the schedule about multilateralism. So they do that through the Nile Basin Initiative. This is the intergovernmental organization for the Nile management. But also, again, you can see the superiority from the technical and capacity building coming from the European Union. So the last thing, how we need you as a take-home messages, how the European Union discourse framing sustainability, which looks like a positive thing, but in favor of their investments cycles, in favor of their security. And yeah, thank you so much. It's I remembered Nagugi Wathingu, the river between, how the wisdom we can collaborating, but it should be coming from us as Nile Basin people rather than opposing the others. Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for Dr. Heidi.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the esteemed colleagues in the session number 3.
Okay, sorry, Professor.
I'm not sure who is attending from session 3.
Just hold on. I'm trying to explain to you. The chair of that session is here now, and the others are also in the room. So you can just wrap your session up.
I've just written in.
Is she hearing me? Okay, are you hearing me, Professor Kares? Can you hear me? No, we don't want to mix the two. Can you hear me?
Okay, now we are going to move on to session number 3, so that's the third session. Let's also check who is attending from the third session. With all due respect, I will say the first name.
Sorry, Professor, can you hear me? Professor Harris, can you hear me?
No, there is connection audio.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Dennis?
Yes, if you can hear me. So the problem is here. Internet connection. Okay. Dr. Abazid, did you hear me?
I I think the problem is on her side.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't even have access to the laptop.
Attending the session. Okay, let's move on to the second paper until we figure out whether Tanis is with us or not. The second one, which is from Japan, about exporting development.
Yes, actually, I'm here, and now the chair of the session 3, I think he wants to chair the session right now. Can you hear his voice?
No, I can't hear.
Oh, okay. But is it okay? The chair of the session 3, can I present now?
Okay, let me just check whether I am I will chair also the third session or not. So let me check. So I can pass the floor for the chair of the third session. Nolan, can you help with this, please?
Okay, we have limited time, but
excellent. So let me first thank you all for attending and give the floor now to the third session and the chair of the third session. I hope you have a very fruitful session, and I want to, of course, thank all those who presented in the second session. Thank you so much. The floor is all yours.
I don't know if they are hearing us. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Professor Kares, can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you, and I read
great.
what you wrote in the chat, that I should leave the next session for the chair of the third session.
Yes.
And I would like to thank you all, and we'll leave the floor all to the third session and the chair of the third session.
Okay.
And I hope they have a very fruitful session as well.
Okay, but we are just
Thank
going
you
to
so
go.
much.
Sorry, we're going to go around
and
the
I would
room.
like to thank the organizing committee.
Okay, does anyone have questions for them for this panel? No? You have? Okay, there is someone here who has a question for your panel. Can you just answer that before you close so that we can carry on with the next one?
Yes, please,
okay,
go ahead. Yes, good. Please go ahead. And I also have a question myself. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, it's a question for you, Professor Kares.
Yes,
I am a PhD researcher from Italian University. And I'm working on the foreign policy of Ethiopia, Senegal, and South Africa. And so I'm very interested in the Egyptian, let's say, perspective on the Nile, that I don't know, actually, that well. So about your presentation, I was wondering what's the position, the European position towards the dispute, let's say, around the GERD. What's the European position also, and how they communicate that with Egypt? Because the Borrell quote wasn't that clear, didn't say that much on the position itself of the EU. So I was wondering if they were more like, let's say, sympathetic with Egypt or with Ethiopia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for this question. In our presentation, we said that the EU represents the Nile as a security threat. A security threat here, that this regional instability, of course, can be considered as a threat. When we look at the EU position, from one side, the EU sometimes supports the Egyptian side and saying that Egypt may have rights but also on the other side, the EU has always elaborated, we emphasized the need for cooperation, the need for reaching consensus, the need for peaceful settlement of this dispute. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
okay.
Are you happy? Yeah, okay. So there's one other question here, if you don't mind.
I do have a question. I do have a question. Can I ask my question to Bernard?
Okay.
Please, for 1 second.
All right.
Bernard, if he's if he's still there, I'm not sure. Okay, he's not here. Okay, so I will save my question and I will send it to him directly.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
There's a question here is it for
and
her?
And I will now pass the floor to the third
person
session.
is not there anymore. Okay, so you can close. Thank you very much, Professor Harris. Thank you for your presentations. Thank you so much to all your panelists. We will now, yes, let's give them a round of applause.
Okay.
Thank you. So we will now go to the next, I will hand over to the chair of the next panel who's here, and she can take it from there.
I stay here?
Thank you so much.
I go there alone. There is someone. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Yes. So now we are passing to the third session. So from what I understood, we are just 3 in the session that are present. I don't know if there are other people online, like Dennis Dezumbe from the University of Chiang in Cameroon. There is someone? No. So I would give directly the floor to Yomin Jung. I don't know if I pronounce it well. Yomin Jung. From the Yokohama National University of Japan with a presentation on exporting development, the South Korean rural model and its local adaptation in Uganda. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, perfect. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you see my... Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving a chance to present at AAPS. My name is Hyo-min Jeong from Yokohama University, and today I will be presenting my research on exporting development, the South Korean rural and its local adaptation in Uganda. So about the background, maybe some of you heard about it, but for most of you, I think it is new. So in Korean, se means new and Maul means the village. So Semal-Unde was a government-led rural development in the 1970s in South Korea, aimed at modernizing rural areas and also improving living standards. The Semal-Unde program has been aimed at transferring beneficial development experiences to other countries right now. And the Semal-Unde project were implemented based on the conditions of each village. As you can see in this picture, they built in infrastructure for a village and sometimes changed the roof to a more modern style. In some villages, they implemented generation projects. So basically, Semal-Unde began as a government-led rural development policy in the 1970s, and now it is a knowledge program that exports to other countries. But there are some controversies. Some people criticize it because it actually functioned as a surveillance military regime. People had to join the Semal-Unde even though they did not want to participate. And that was missing. And some studies point out that Samonda was essentially a government-led policy, but it also emphasized the grassroots participation and the can-do spirit or diligence, self-help, and cooperation as the basic ideology. So about Korean Samal, the nature of the policy, combination of the top-down and bottom-up approaches. But basically, it is difficult to make the same structure in other countries, usually transferred to the community-led development, emphasizing the bottom-up approach. So this led my research question how Samal development model was adopted in Uganda and what are the factors led the adaptation. So this research employed a qualitative method beginning with the field work in Uganda conducted from 2022 to 2025, each approximately 2 weeks. So actually there are so many villages in Uganda, and the support from the Korean Samal Center is a project for one region, and there's a paying cost for 2 Ugandans, and providing training opportunities for the village leaders. So a person in charge, there are more than 300 Samal villages in Uganda, which I just can't track, but they have a self-help, which means without aid, and basically villages start from the self-help villages. There are some aid receiving villages which were recommended and selected from self-help villages. So I'm wondering why and spreading in Uganda. In many cases, it was usually by the mobile initiative, they call it. So the staffs and the local leaders, they go to the villages, request to come and do some lectures and somehow recording the idea and methods. So they even just made some textbooks in local language to spread it easily. So it looks like this. There are some that Korean was poor, but it developed fast with history. And also there, I just show you that it just change it. Yeah, they could just change their villages by like through somehow. So I actually had a question why they're doing this voluntarily. So I asked villagers why and how did you start, and they explained that they just wanted to develop their self and their villages, and they also saw other villages had changed it. So yeah, and the other villagers, they introduced the staff and to him, and they started. That was their answer. And I also noticed that there are some characteristics of Samal village leader in Uganda. Teachers are involved in Samal a lot. I interviewed 6 villagers, but all of them had experiences as the teachers. So teachings are necessary maybe to convey some of them and take the leadership. Also, literacy and numeracy were important because they have to the whole process. And about the motivation for participation, so there are certain common factors that participants repeatedly pointed out. The reasons are quite simple, but they mainly fall to 2 categories. First, they wanted to improve their lives and their villages, and second, they were interested in generation projects. And I actually found some participants were also involved in other similar activities in the village that had similar goals with the SMO. So this suggests that there is a clear demand for this kind of development in the villages. And there are also possible future incentives. The leaders or villagers have chances to trainings related to agricultural skills and mindset. So there are chances to have free trainings in Uganda, early in Korea. Also, there are some possibilities of being a receiving village. In this case, they can receive external. Also, I had a chance to see some challenges in some villages. The most significant challenges faced by some villages in Uganda include market risks, such as price fluctuations, crop failure, climate change, which can undermine the success of income generation projects. The villagers are concerned with selecting the right products to grow and sell, as well as how to manage the financial and operational risk associated with these ventures. There are also challenges related to participation matters. So it was such as expanded village participation, and also they need a more youth participations. Sometimes free riding challenges to the handle somehow. So in summary, SML model in Korea combined both top-down, bottom-up approaches. Uganda's adaptation has primarily a bottom-up, greater emphasis on participation, grassroots leadership, and self-help initiatives. And the mobile school system involved in educating adults about SML has spread the SML across the Uganda. Local leaders with a teaching background has played a key facilitating this project. So in Uganda, SML was transferred as a decontextualized model, but also reinterpreted and fit it to local realities. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much for this very interesting presentation on SAML models that I didn't know about. I don't know you. So now, Frank, it's you, Frank Lekaba. Okay, from Wits University in South Africa with a presentation on BRICS expansion in Africa. What about the Africa agenda among its African member states?
Thank you very much, ma'am, and I'm happy that you are here because I heard you said you write on Ethiopia and Egypt's foreign policies. So you will help me a lot in strengthening this paper. Colleagues, what I'm doing here with this paper is to analyze the 3 BRICS member states, particularly South Africa, Ethiopia, and Egypt. Egypt and Ethiopia, we know, joined BRICS in 2024 when the first expansion took place. So the idea is to look at their foreign policies, the values, principles that underpin their foreign policies, to be able to determine or to be able to argue whether they can serve the Africa agenda in this structure called BRICS. Can they elevate the African continent? Can they represent the African continent as much as they may be advancing their national interests within BRICS? So this is what I'm trying to do with this paper. So how I'm conceptualizing it, I'm taking from the concept of a regional hegemon as conceptualized by Detlef Nolte. He has done a quite extensive work in conceptualizing a pivot state and regional hegemons. So I'm adopting his conception of a regional hegemon, and he has got detailed attributes of what constitutes a regional hegemon. So I will just briefly go through what are these attributes. One, a regional hegemon is a state which articulates the pretension, maybe self-conception of a leading position in a region that is geographically, economically, and politically delimited. A state which displays the material, military, economic, and geographic components, and organizational, this is political, and ideological resources for regional power projection. A state which truly has great influence in regional affairs, which is economically, politically, and culturally interconnected to the region, which influences in a significant way the geopolitical delimitation and the political ideational construction of the region, which exerts this influence by means of regional governance structures, which defines and articulates a common regional identity or project, which is integrated in inter-regional and global forums and institutions where it articulates not only its own interest, but as well, at least in the rudimentary way, as a representative of regional interests. So this is what Nolte has developed as a concept of a regional hegemony. And I'm using it very mindful of the debate that took place here in Codesria, particularly between Mafeja and Mazrui, on the concept of a regional hegemon. And Mazrui was kind of, Mazrui provocatively wrote a paper on self-colonization and or recolonization, and was particularly arguing that countries like Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, and Egypt could serve as pivot states for the development of their regions. And Mafeja had a problem because Mafeja argued that these specific states that you are talking about have got their own national questions that they have to resolve. For example, in South Africa, we have got a huge issue around, sometimes we call it Afrophobia, sometimes it's called xenophobia. So a country that has got that kind of a phenomenon, how does it punctuate itself as a representative of the region? So that was Mafeja's argument. But interestingly, when you read closely what in that argument of Mafeja, he was basically arguing for multilateralism. And I will then go, Mafeja was basically saying, instead of relying on these pivot states, you can do that on, through the regional economic communities, or through the AU, or whatever multilateral organization. And I remember he's pointedly referred to a UN trusteeship as a kind of an arrangement that helped in terms of how multilateralism can help to advance. So I'm mindful of that debate as I'm adopting this conception of a regional hegemon from Nolte. But then let me quickly rush to specific foreign policy principles of these three member states. And I will start with South Africa. And I did, as I was doing my writing, I did document analysis. So I took foreign policy documents from the governments of these three states. I took the writings of scholars, and so it was basically document analysis and literature review. And South Africa's 2011 white paper indicates that the principles and values of South Africa are based on two central tenets, namely Pan-Africanism and South-South solidarity. I will not go much to elaborate on this. But this is how South Africa sees itself as it engages. And it has clearly titled its white paper, interestingly to say, Foreign Policy of Ubuntu. Sometimes they say better Africa, better world, as a way of demonstrating how South Africa identifies itself with the region of the continent in global affairs and in how it seeks to champion its foreign policy and as it plays a role in these multilateral organizations. And this has remained consistent since post-1994, and it could be because there's been similar party in government. It's been the ANC through and through. So the policy continuity can be justified. But when you look at Egypt, it has got some inconsistencies in terms of its foreign policy posture. There is what they call, the Egyptian scholars, they term Nasarian three-ring theory in Egyptian foreign policy. The Arab, Islamic, and African international circles in the Egyptian foreign policy. So the first angle upon which Egypt pursues its foreign policies on the basis of Arab interests, and then followed by Islamic and then African and international cycles. So whenever you want to understand how Egypt engages, you must understand it from those three ring theory from NASA. And of course, the Muslim Brotherhood, Mubarak kind of had a departure from that foreign policy principles, and then Muslim Brotherhood, when he took over, it also went back to the Mubarak's foreign policy to the NASA's foreign policy principles. But now with the LCC, right? We are seeing going back again to Mubarak's kind of a foreign policy principles. I will not go into detail because of time. We'll do that when you go for the discussion. And then I looked at Ethiopia's 2002 national security policy and strategy. And it articulates certain foundations there that guide the foreign policy of Ethiopia. And it says, firstly, is the development and the building of a democratic system as a basis for policy, national pride, and prestige as a basis for policy, globalization, and as a basis for policy, foreign policy. And it's very articulate. But what's interesting, I will not go into details of that. What's interesting is that Abiy Ahmed introduced a new foreign policy in Ethiopia, and it's titled Medema. It merges a retrospective embrace of Ethiopia's historical values with a forward-looking assessment of its resources, shunning imported ideologies like realism for a cooperative, homegrown ethos. And this is an Ethiopian scholar who writes and analyzes this foreign policy. Colleagues, a closer scrutiny on the values and principles underpinning foreign policies of the three African member states of BRICS shows a contrasting view. Foreign policies of both Ethiopia and Egypt seem to be driven by changes in the incumbencies and domestic politics. And of course, that is always the case. And then this may suggest that these two African member states cannot be considered reliable in the changing global order. And this is my argument. We can debate that. To survive under the changing global politics, Ethiopia and Egypt may hide behind the front cover of BRICS. But when Trump does what he did to say he's imposing extra tariffs on BRICS member states, it's where now the authenticity to their reliance, their alliance in the BRICS is going to be much more revealed. I mean, not only Ethiopia, but member states. Whether will they continue the alliance or not, or to a certain extent, they may continue the alliance, but to a certain extent, pursue different interests. And all the three African members, I want to, when we adopt that conception of Nolte, in their regional hegemons in their own respective regions, they meet the definition of a regional power. Ethiopia, in my opinion, and from my own observation, is what we may categorize as an imperfect hegemon because of its own history of how it engaged in the region, destabilizing some of the countries within the region to ensure its dominance and security, of course, among other things. And I will discuss this. Whereas I argue South Africa is a reluctant hegemon that relies on multilateralism to pursue regional values. So South Africa will say, let's go to SADC and try to persuade within the SADC region a policy position, whereas to a certain extent has to lead. And because of this, to a certain extent, it's hamstrung. So it's a reluctant hegemon, and it's because of its own history as well, particularly the history of apartheid as a pariah. And then Egypt, of course, it's a hegemon. But when you look at the hegemony of Egypt, it's because of its global relations, not necessarily of its material capabilities compared to other players within the region itself, but its strategic positioning in the region, particularly when you look at what we call Camp David's agreement that assures security within the Middle East and all of that. So that's how, in my opinion, in my analysis, I see Egyptian foreign hegemony coming out. Colleagues, the foreign policy values and principles of Egypt and Ethiopia are marked by shifts in alliances in global politics and are transactional. They are mainly based on advancement of the national interests with inconsistent values and principles, while South Africa has remained consistent since 1994 in terms of its values. South Africa has proven that it can advance the Africa agenda within BRICS and in global politics, while Ethiopia and Egypt have no evidence of this claim. South Africa and Ethiopia can claim the identity of being part with the global South and its struggles. But Egypt has got those credentials under NASA. But since after NASA, you cannot really confidently say Egypt has got those attributes of a country that aligns correctly with the global South. And we know BRICS is very open on its positioning as a center of the global South. South Africa has over the years been able to keep a balance of engagement with the countries of the global South and the global North, and has been able to articulate its foreign policy position, especially on issues of reform of global structures. This sentiment has not been articulated by both Egypt and Ethiopia. Its foreign policy positioning on the Security Council reform, on other multilateral reforms, World Trade Organization, and all of that. So, what am I saying here? What I'm saying here is, looking at the foreign policy principles of the three countries, we are seeing not so much, I don't see so much, I'm not so much confident with how they advance their foreign policies as to whether they can advance the Africa agenda. Particularly Ethiopia and Egypt. South Africa, to a certain extent, can claim to have done so, and can claim to be continuing to do so. But as we think of the Africa agenda, sovereignty of the African continent, I think the reliance on states is not going to be so much helpful. So the inclusion of AU in the G20 is what I think, as scholars in the continent, is what we should champion. To say the AU should also be included in other institutions. For example, BRICS, if it's to be really serious, it needs to include. So when you talk of China-Africa engagement, it must be China-Africa engagement hinged on the AU and of course the member states of the African continent. That's my submission to the conference. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very, very interesting and also very close to my research, so it's super interesting. So now I will present myself. Sorry. Do you prefer in English or French? English, okay. What? What do you mean, second paper?
Yes, they are different. Yeah, they are two different. So why don't we deal with this so that we don't forget something?
Do you want to ask a question now? Yes. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it.
That has not been traditionally listening to
No, I think we can do the question to him now, so it's fresher. No, as you prefer. If you already have question, I have a question myself. So please.
I think it's your discretion, but I was going to say, since there is an overlap between your paper and this paper, you may as well present
Okay.
Because the danger here is we're going to put this man on the spotlight.
Vabbè, I present and then we do it later, okay? Okay. I don't have Egypt as a case study. So, my presentation is called African Agencies in the Multipolar Global Context, a comparative analysis of the foreign policy of Ethiopia, Senegal, and South Africa. So it's a presentation, let's say, of my, in reality, PhD research and from where I want to extract an article. So let's say that the broader scope of the research is to explore how African states navigate the current increasingly, let's say, multipolar global order. And specifically, it examines the concept of African agency through the comparative analysis of the foreign policy of these three countries that are Ethiopia, Senegal, and South Africa. So in the paper, not in, but also in the broader research, one of the point of departure is the marginality of African countries, and the idea is to see how the perspective from the margins can help to better understand the whole system. So how the understanding from what is going on in the global order, let's say, from African countries is better to understand what is the so-called multipolarity today, if it exists, and how to define it. So from this point of view, this idea of marginality is in a political economical sense. So it's based on the classic world system theories by Wallerstein and Arrighi, where in these theories, to be in a marginal position or the periphery, let's say, of the global economic system means a lack, let's say, of structural power, that is power defined in a very orthodox and classic way, so economic, military means, etc. And the idea is to understand, but does it mean a lack of agency? So let's say that the first formulation of the concept of agency is understood as a critical understanding as different from the structural power. So in the research, I focus on the state agency, since the term African agency can be applied to various actors that could be African states, but also civil society, etc. So my focus it's on the state agency that is applied to the three case studies. It's built on the existing literature on African agency, and let's say that the first proposal in order to contribute a bit on the ongoing debate is to reconsider the fact of speaking of African agency at the singular term and to decline it since the beginning at the plural term. So African agencies ou agences EES africaines. Since it's very difficult, let's say, to grasp since the beginning an ontological unity of Africa itself, and so also of African agencies. So I start to speak just about African agencies, plural. And this notion of plurality underpins also the research design and the empirical strategy of my research, that is the comparative analysis of these three cases. So it follows, the research follows what is called a most dissimilar design. That means that I took three examples that have very different characteristics in terms of history, geography, etc. But the three countries, so Ethiopia, South Africa, and Senegal, can be seen not as regional hegemon, so that's a debate that consider a definition of regional hegemon, etc., but let's say at least relevant or very relevant in their own region. Plus, they have this. They seem to have this similar output in what I look. So the foreign policy at the international level. And the idea is to understand why the output, so the things that I looked for, is similar while the countries are different. So basically my research question is Is there a common trend in the foreign policy of these three African countries in the context of an increasingly multipolar global system? And if so, how and to what extent do they exert agencies? So in the article I'm presenting, let's say I'm just focusing on the international level of the foreign policy, since in my research I do a multi-level analysis that goes from domestic factors that are at the basis of the formulation of the foreign policy to regional foreign policy, so in the region or in the REC, continental foreign policy, so in Africa and within the African Union, and then international foreign policy, that means basically bilateral relations with the non-African countries, so international partners, and behavior, let's say, in multilateral fora. And in the article, the research question addressed more precisely the intersection and potential, in one side the intersection, on the other the potential discrepancies between the economic interests of the selected countries and their political and diplomatic stance. So basically the analysis is the first one on political positioning, let's say, and the second one on economic diplomacy. So in terms of methodology, it's mainly qualitative, so it's a gather of mainly interviews from diplomats and international and regional organization official and expert from the three countries, plus of course press article, academic works on the matter. So in the first part, so I analyzed the positioning towards global issues in the context of key political and diplomatic issues, trying to address the concept of non-alignment. So it's mainly the position adopted, it's a comparison of the position adopted by the three countries on key global issues such as Ukraine and so the war in Ukraine and the conflict in Gaza, with the analysis of the interpretation of their justification, let's say, on the positioning on this stance. So I go directly to the conclusion here of the different positioning on Ukraine and Gaza. So in terms of non-alignment, first of all, the non-alignment of the three countries regarding Ukraine can be seen as ideological, political, and symbolic, evoking the non-aligned movement, particularly in the case of South Africa, that has a strong attachment, symbolic attachment, let's say, to its membership to the non-aligned movement after the end of apartheid. Which meaning has to be, of course, refrained in a non-bipolar world. So, but apart from that, let's say that this non-alignment 2.0 is mostly pragmatical. First of all, because of the fear of the economic consequence of unilateral sanctions, such as the one of the West on Russia. They want also to be detached from a Western issue such as the war in Ukraine, or even if in some cases such as South Africa there have been also episodes that are let's say at the basis of the current tension between the US and South Africa, such as the involvement of there was a case of a Russian boat called Lady R during the beginning, let's say, of the war in Ukraine. So there have been some elements regarding the relationship between South Africa and Russia, just in the case of South Africa. But in any ways, let's say that the position appeared to be justified, this non-aligned position appeared to be justified more or less in similar way with shared trends, even if semantically speaking, sometimes there is a mismatch or there isn't a clear definition of non-alignment and neutrality. So, for example, in South Africa, there is a strong debate about the concept of non-alignment nowadays in the South African foreign policy, while, for example, here in Senegal, some people call it also neutral position. So there isn't this precise distinction of what is non-alignment, what is neutrality, etc. But more or less, the justification behind are the same. While in Gaza, of course, the positions are more assertive, excluding the case of Ethiopia, that is more ambiguous, and can be interpreted as an example of agency intended as a genuine resoluteness within the international debate. So, of course, in the case of South Africa and the ICJ case against Israel. And in all this, regarding Gaza particularly, but also in the case on Ukraine, if we take Senegal and South Africa, there is a strong attachment to the historical roots, let's say, of the traditional foreign policy of the three countries. So in one case, the one of the ANC, and the other case, the one that starts with Senghor. While in the case of Gaza, it is rooted also in historical ties, such as, for example, but also cultural ties, such as, for example, the Muslim community or the pro-Palestinian stance by the ANC. So it's more historical rather than, let's say, based on the foreign policy principle. But in any case, all this, let's say, even if the level of assertiveness differs in the two cases, so in Ukraine and Gaza, both of them can signify an autonomous policy orientation that denote a refusal to side with one actor over another. For example, in South Africa, some actors called also the position on Gaza, so the case against Israel, a non-aligned position, not because it doesn't take a stance, but because it takes its own stance. So their non-alignment means its own position and not something that is based on the position of someone else. In any case, the interesting thing is that differently from the non-aligned movement and what non-alignment meant during the non-aligned movement and the Cold War, here it is individual foreign policy strategy adopted by the three countries and not like a group position that is discussed in a multilateral fora such as the non-aligned movement. So it's individual, but there is a current trend that is adopted by those three countries. Then in the second part, I focus on the economic diplomacy and diversification. So very briefly, there is an increasing diversification of economic partnerships and efforts and strategy to strengthen their international economic engagement, mainly attracting foreign investor and improving trade. So in the case of, I just do the case of Ethiopia because we don't have enough time, but basically in Ethiopia, since as on the other two countries, since 2000 there is, sorry. I try. So, to conclude, ouais. So to conclude, we can see that in the three cases, the diplomatic relations are increasingly based in a transactional model that is consistent with their political alignment. So in the case of non-alignment, for example, with Ukraine and Gaza, even if they're potentially in tension with certain principles of their official foreign policy. So for example, in South Africa, there is this internal debate about the South African position on one side on Ukraine and the other side on Gaza, where some people argue that if the position on Ukraine was following the values of the South African foreign policy, it should not be non-aligned because it goes against the principle of territorial integrity, while other argues that it's a political positioning and that it has that is consistent, let's say, with the South African foreign policy principle. So in this sense, the non-alignment and the economic diversification seems to go hand in hand, including the BRICS membership in the case of already in the case of South Africa, but also in the case of Ethiopia, and also Senegal did that demand and would like to join the group. And what is interesting is that in the discourse, there is a strong importance of the national interest. That is a repeated concept. So even if there is a common trend among the countries, most of their action are ultimately aimed at advancing just their national interests. And so that corroborates, let's say, the idea of African agencies plural and instead of African agency singular. Thank you. Try to go back there. Sure. I'll try. So if you have questions, there is nobody else, right? No, not even online. Okay, so if you have any questions, sir? Yes? Do you have the mic? There is a...
Thank you, Chair. My name is Khotazo Shai. I'm from South Africa. I've got a question for Frank. Why do you have doubts on Ethiopia's commitment to the African agenda? The country has got a rich legacy in terms of contribution on Africa's anti-imperial struggles and the pursuit of Pan-Africanism. So I will, to a certain extent, understand your doubts on Egypt, because you mentioned that you have got doubts on Egypt and Ethiopia. But I don't understand why you have got doubts on Ethiopia, more especially because even the administrative home of the African Union is in Addis Ababa, and I'm confused. Please take me into confidence. Thank you.
I think that it's important for us to have some kind of conceptual clarity, and I think you mentioned that when you were speaking, that we can go into the definition of hegemony, right? And I've just sent you that paper I wrote on this subject so that you can get that clarity, Frank. The confusion I have with your work is coming from your understanding of hegemony, which needs to change. Because even Nolte, that you quoted, her work was based on the works of Sandra Desradi, Susan Price, that have done a very good job of, conceptualizing hegemony, what hegemony really means. And if you go through that, and I've sent you my work on it, and you can see, because I do categorization of all three of them, including Nolte, and then came out with a subcategorization of group hegemonic leadership. So the point I'm trying to make is that in the liberal sense of the word, of the concept of hegemony, we do not have a hegemony in Africa. Neither Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, any of the countries, not one qualifies, if we go strictly by the definition of, the liberal definition of hegemony. All right? So what these people have done is to make distinctions between different types of hegemony and leadership. I don't want to take too much time and make those distinctions here, but what South Africa, Nigeria, any of these countries qualify as would probably be regional leaders. They are regional leaders because they provide certain public goods. They enjoy a measure of legitimacy and acceptance in their region, but not in the entire continent. All right? South Africa may be so in Southern Africa, but there are challengers. Nigeria in West Africa, but even within West Africa, there are challengers. You mentioned xenophobia as impeding that profile. In Nigeria, the inability to deal with Boko Haram impedes that. So overall, when you put all of it together, you don't find. But you have regional leaders. So what we have then done is to say, you can, if we don't have hegemon because of the fact that we don't qualify, especially in terms of the military ability to force concession, force public goods, force legitimacy, and dominate completely. If we don't have that, then we may use the leadership profile of some of these regional leaders, and then they can come together and provide what I call group hegemonic leadership to the African continent. All right? And in terms of legitimacy, because which can be a question, so if you say Nigeria, if you say South Africa, if you say Ethiopia in East Africa, if you say DRC in Central Africa, where's the other region? North Africa, you say Egypt, right? Immediately, Algeria will contend with Egypt. Tunisia may be in the frame. Morocco, even though they claim a lot of exceptionalism with Europe, can also claim the same thing, using the 3 concentric cycles you talk about. In Southern Africa, it's the same thing. In West Africa, the same thing. So people can say, why will Nigeria be there in perpetuity, representing the whole of West Africa? Why will South Africa be there? So to gain the legitimacy question, I have also proposed that the leadership can be rotated among the countries. Say maybe every 5 years, it changes to the next country until every single country in each region of the continent is represented in that group hegemonic leadership council, so that everybody will not accept whatever decision, knowing fully well that at some point they will be in that position, right? Just like we're trying to rotate the membership of the UN Security Council for non-permanent members. So that is what I have proposed. So in the absence, if you get that clarity that we don't have a hegemon and we have leaders, can the leaders come together and provide group hegemony? Because together, if they have legitimacy and if you pull the resources together, they can, based on common African positions, advance interests that benefit the continent, and they can come as a group and negotiate on our behalf with superpowers like the United States, China, or Russia that are coming for our resources today. In the absence of that, they will nitpick, they will cherry pick, knock us together, classic divide and rule, and continue to get their way. And that's exactly what Mr. Trump is doing now with South Africa. The minute they announce that they are not going to invite South Africa to the G20 in 2026, what does he do? He invites the president of Kenya to the White House and says, they are a beautiful country. I like Kenya now. And then there's giving Kenya almost $200 billion to help their health facilities. Then he signs a peace deal with Rwanda and DRC and gives the same amount of money to Rwanda. What is going to happen is that Kenya will be invited to the G20. Rwanda probably also get invited to the G20. And the idea is to spite us, because he knows that the Cold War between Kigali and Pretoria will make Kigali want to punish Pretoria, to say, you think you are the best, now we are here. So those are the kind of things that they are doing. So our only hope, and this is what I've advocated, is for Africa, for example, take a common African position on the G20 and simply say, we're not coming to Miami in Florida in 2026. Africa is not doing G20. The African Union is not going to do G20. Mr. Trump, finish with your G20. When it goes to the UK, we'll come back, because we're permanent members. You can't suspend us, but we can choose not to engage the same way you chose not to engage in the G20 in South Africa. When we do that, and he sees that, he calls Kenya and says, sorry, the African Union has taken a position and we cannot disrespect it. He calls Rwanda, Rwanda says the same thing. You know what's going to happen? South Africa gets back to the G20 and the African Union gets back to the G20. It's as simple as that. We are weak, but if we act in unison, collectively as a group, we can punch, because we have critical minerals.
BRICS plus. I'm just thinking out loud, what if the African position that these two countries, or these three countries, South Africa, Ethiopia, and Egypt will represent, is not explicitly articulated? What if these countries do not articulate an explicit African position, but then there are certain beneficial consequences of these two countries joining? Now, we may have to dig more into it, but I think one of the reasons why Egypt and Ethiopia did not go to war over the Ged Dam was because they were just about joining the BRICS. The BRICS, Ethiopia and Egypt, or at the Grand Renaissance Dam, when they were nearly at each other's throat, the reason why they stalled was because they were about to join the BRICS. And a similar thing happened between the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, just around the same time that Egypt and Ethiopia joined. So there could be normative, if you like, positive dividends that may accrue with respect to the strengthening of the African position in terms of its political development trajectory. That may not necessarily be articulated, but it can be derived from the mere fact that these two or three countries are members of the BRICS.
Frank, Professor Nweke earlier said that you have a more capacity a better capacity to receive, various reactions from the audience. And mine is very simple on the assertion of the study that South Africa is advancing, the interest of the rest of Africa. That will contradict the nationalistic nature of the South African economy, with its attendant protectionist policies, not opening up, to other African countries, to do business together. Its harsh immigration policies, border controls, is a major problem. Of course, you've mentioned the issue of the xenophobic violence against other African immigrants. So for South Africa to, actually claim, I think it's, they have a lot. South Africa has a lot to do. Because how about the crisis in Sudan? The crisis in DRC? What is the level of involvement of South Africa in resolving these issues? So South Africa has a lot. South Africa lay claim to good leadership of advancing the African interest. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that Professor CK also, learned a lot of maybe clarity to what I could have, or the areas I would have wanted to punch my friend, brother Frank. I said, I didn't say he has more capacity, but I say he has capacity, to withstand all the blows. My worry, first of all, Professor CK talked about group hegemony. And if the individual state hegemony thing doesn't work, I doubt if the group would work. That's how I want to, start with that. If one state can't lay claim to that kind of hegemony, even coming together becomes problematic, if you ask me. Then, let me also go this other way. Let's be sincere to ourselves. Do we as Africans, or even call it African continent, love ourselves as a whole, care for ourselves as a whole, can take risks on behalf of the entire continent? Or even the ones Professor Isike talked about, leaders, regional leaders, so to say. Maybe South Africa on one side, talk about Nigeria and West Africa and other, go to North America and all of those. So even with those regional leaders or powers, so to say, either in terms of resources and then maybe military might, do you think, let me not just say you, do we think in this as Africans that individually or individual states are truly genuine when it comes to the issue of our plight vis-a-vis the West, our relationship with the West? Or do you not think that individual states, you talked about foreign policies of these, you talked about South Africa, Ethiopia, right? You identified some of these countries, their foreign policies and all of those. And if you look at their foreign policies are centered on, even when those days you talk about Nigeria's foreign policy is Afrocentric. But I can say in this room, without any fear of contradiction, that Nigeria can be said to have the interests of the African continent at heart more than any other. Not because I come from Nigeria. A typical example is what just happened in Benin a few days ago. Maybe one will want to say because Benin shares a boundary with Nigeria. Of course, don't also forget that there may be fear by the leaders that what is happening in Benin, or if it's allowed, or what happened in Benin, if allowed, could have could transition into, so to say, in quotes, into Nigeria, or could be imported into Nigeria. But Nigeria is willing to take risks. Nigeria is willing to spend our resources for the interests of Africans, more than even the South Africa you're talking about. Not because you are South African and I'm pointing at you, no. Not because I'm from Nigeria, but Nigeria, even though we may say that we want to play the big brotherly role when it comes to our side, but internally, we have our issues to deal with. Somebody, one of the key note speakers yesterday said, or yesterday, that if we could not deal with the banditry or insurgency that we have in Nigeria, Boko Haram, if we say we have all the military might, then, we couldn't deal with those, and all we could do was to advance, our troops to Benin Republic because probably that's in the interest of the state actors more than I don't, on that on one side you would say, okay, maybe it was in the interest of the state actors, not actually that Nigeria wants to play that brotherly law. But on the other side, you also want to advance that cause. But generally, so that I won't take our time, the point I'm making is that this African agenda that I want to talk about, if you talk about our leaders, our nationalists, in the past and all of those, Nyerere and all those who fought for, the interests of Africa, that is understandable. But today's Africa leaders across, whether from north, south, west, and all that, it appears that the agenda we are all pursuing are our own internal state agenda than the agenda of the African continent. And so whatever you're talking about BRICS and all that, for me, they are just mere, colorations to divert the interest of, maybe those who are in the different countries, to divert the interest of those who are, who have their eyes on the leaders across the states, rather than pursuing the interest of the collective African continent. That's my position.
Other questions?
Thank you. I don't know if Yomin Young is still connected. Is she still online? Yes, she is. Okay, so I'll ask my question. Thank you for your presentation, Yomin. I was wondering if the Ugandan Ministry of Agriculture is in any way involved in this exportation of the South Korean rural model, or maybe what was their reaction, if you have any governmental official reactions to the exportation of this model. And another question to you, Sophia, because you can answer questions. Can you please walk us through why you decided to focus on Ethiopia and not, for example, Kenya, if we're focusing on East Africa? I know you said that it's not because it's a regional hegemon, but maybe give us the characteristics, or is it just personal preference, maybe? I don't know. Yep, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Other questions?
So I agree with the professor at the back that the states themselves are too weak to be able to make any meaningful impact if they band together. But that is not correct, because that is why the banding together is important, because they are weak in and of themselves. Individually, they cannot contend. But if they come together as a group, they can. And that's why we have regional integration anyway. That's why the European Union came together. That's why you have NATO. As individual countries, they will not be able to fend off Russia, for example. But if they come together and make contributions into a defense pact, they can contend as a group. That's what we're saying. That Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, Egypt, DRC can come together and say, we want to pool our resources together in this sort of way, and we want to be able to negotiate as a bloc against the usurpers of our resources. We want to contend that we have gone to the African Union. We've presented that we have a common African position on critical minerals, for example. We have a common African position on trade and tariffs. We have a common African position on security. If you say you want to secure us, this is how we need the security. If you are not doing that, please, you can keep your goodies to yourself. If all of us band together like that, the tendency to be able to resist imperialism, the new imperialism on the continent will be, I'm not saying it's not going to happen, it will be there, but it will be easier. But if you say, oh, we must wait until we are all strong individually to be able to now function as a group, it will never happen. That doesn't mean that we do not need to go back to our state systems, deal with our corruption, deal with our issues, and try to be better, because that in itself, remember, domestic and foreign policy are interlinked. If we are strong at home, then we can be in a better position to say, how can we advance beyond the home to a collective platform?
Other questions? Okay, I pass the floor to online to Yomin Jung to address the question that was made on the Ministry of Agriculture. Elle est pas là? I don't know. Not online, I would say. So, yeah, I would say the floor is yours. I had questioned myself. I do agree that Ethiopia doesn't have Pan-African foreign policy, even if the headquarters is in Addis Ababa. It's just a matter of symbolic capitals from Ethiopia, but in terms of effective policy, they're not so Pan-African, and they're not. I mean, the situation is so complicated in the Horn of Africa that it's difficult to call them an hegemon. And to answer quickly to your question, I choose Ethiopia not because I like it more than Kenya, but because in terms of outcome of their foreign policy, there is a common trend with my other two case studies that are Senegal and South Africa that goes in reality on what you were saying. So the fact that there isn't that much this continental or regional integration, there's a lot of saying things, but concretely there is less, and so that's why I'm looking at common patterns that are not coordinated. Yeah, so to you.
Thank you very much. Professor, you hear the response? Because when you go to the Ethiopia's white paper, policy documents on foreign policy, starting from the government of 1991, the coalition government since 1991, until now with Abiy Ahmed, the policy has not been Pan-African. Yes, Ethiopia has got a great claim, and that's what I said in my presentation, that Ethiopia has got great claim. It can claim as a part of being in the struggles of the Global South. That history we cannot deny it. But foreign policy since 1991, until recently, with the one that is coming in from Abiy Ahmed's government, Pan-Africanism is not there. In action, even in principles. So that's when you look at their documents. So I went into the foreign policy documents to distill all of these things so that I don't imagine them, Prof, so that I also protect myself, that I'm not a good scholar, I'm not a credible scholar. So you have to go through those documents to do that document analysis. Prof, I'm not going to debate the conception of regional hegemony and all of that. I take your submissions. And I just want to add that the idea you are talking about, the collectiveness, think of NEPAD under the leadership that came in the early 2000s. What it did for the continent and the Africa agenda. So that was a collective hegemony that you are talking about, Prof. And that collective hegemony, when you look at it closely, was multilateral. It was not collective hegemony because of individuality, let's bring our strength together, but it was multilateral. Hence the approach was even centered on the refoundation of the African Union and pursue that Africa agenda through the African Union. And that's why then in my conclusion, I argue that placing our hopes on nation states will not take us anywhere, because nation states have got their own national questions to answer, have got changes of regimes internally, and that will then impact on the foreign policy of the state itself. So multilateral approach to the Africa agenda is very important. And it's what I think, and this is what I'm trying to do. It must be implicit in the foreign policies of African states. That resolving African problems should be based on the... Today we can talk of coups, and the Alliance of the Sahel can do what it tries to do now, because of a normative framework that is there of the AU. So, that multilateralism is very important, colleagues. Is it not early? Prof, look, I was very careful in my analysis, in my write-up of the paper, to be specific, to narrow my parameters of analysis. That's why I was specific to foreign policy principles, and then I was focused on the engagement with the Global South, whether Ethiopia has credentials to claim that it's part of the Global South, and what makes it to be part of the Global South, Ethiopia, Egypt, South Africa. And then also their conduct when they are in the multilateral system. For example, one of the biggest issues, not only the xenophobic issue in South Africa, but the vote on Libya is one of those serious blemishes on South Africa's foreign policy. It was an embarrassment that South Africa voted for a no-fly zone on Libya. And Egypt as well did. Egypt was part of the UN Security Council at the time. So, and it's all because of the fact that we say, if hegemony is done and is conducted individually, it can be very problematic for the Africa agenda. But it's best when it's done, and we can even go as far as in the 1960s and see how the continental agenda was shaped, was not driven and shaped by one particular state, but there was always that collectiveness. We have a very passionate Pan-Africanist in South Africa who talks about how Kwame Nkrumah was pained when he came back from Addis Ababa, and Haile Selassie had to speak to him to say, accept this defeat in 1963, to say, accept this defeat, it's fine, but the struggle will continue. So that collective hegemony is very, very, very much important, Prof. But I think it's not too early to analyze and determine. But it's important for us to do an analysis that will say, can they advance the Africa agenda? And should they advance the Africa agenda? We should, I think, place it on them. And then, yeah, no, I'm not going to belabor the points, colleagues. I take whatever has been said. I will go and revise my paper accordingly. Just on South Africa alone, there is positives and there's negatives. I can divide the room here when you talk about South Africa's engagement in the continent. For example, Sagi Mohammed, I forget the name, Mohammed, the AU Commission chair then, wanted to grant Israel an observer status within the AU. South Africa and Algeria had to stop that observer status that the AU Commission chair had granted to. He had granted it to Israel. South Africa and Algeria had to go and stop it. In fact, before the summit, the foreign minister of Algeria went to South Africa to go and try to formulate a common position on how to stop Israel from being an observer status, getting that observer status within the AU. So that is one of those attributes I talk about. When I talk about the leadership, the invitation of African states to BRICS and getting to include Africa agenda in its declaration. And when you look at G20, how that G20 declaration, to a certain extent, is in the interest of the continent itself. Critical minerals, climate adaptability funding of climate adaptability debt. For example, Ethiopia can't finance its servicing of the debt, and it had to rely on that common framework to skip the payment of the debt that it owes to to the Bretton Woods institution. I think for the past 2 years, 3 years. And this is despite, yesterday they were talking about growth. This is despite Ethiopia registering growth rates of around 5%. But it is in debt distress as a state. So anyway, it's okay, colleagues. So what I wanted to say is, Prof, this issue of hegemony is a highly contested, I accept. It's a highly contested notion, and but it doesn't mean we must stay away from it or abandon it. It's the same as earlier on we were talking about the state, how the state is contested. But it doesn't mean we must abandon the state and be nihilist in our approach towards the state. Thank you very much, colleagues.
I would say that's the end. Thank you.